What does it take to destroy a billion-dollar empire? It's not a market crash or a corporate takeover. Sometimes it's just a cup of coffee. You're about to hear the story of Alistair Finch, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with power, a man who could move markets with a single word, and Maya Reynolds, a waitress just trying to make it through her shift. A confrontation lasting less than 30 seconds, a splash of scalding liquid, and one unblinking security camera. This isn't just a story about a bad temper. It's about how a single viral clip of footage didn't just cost a CEO his job, it ended his entire world overnight. The air in The Gilded Bean was a carefully curated symphony of scents and sounds. It smelled of single-origin Ethiopian yirgacheffe, freshly baked almond croissants, and the subtle, expensive perfume of its clientele. It sounded of clinking porcelain, the whisper of stock market apps being refreshed on phones, and the low, confident murmur of people who believed the world was their personal boardroom. This corner of Manhattan was a stage, and every patron was an actor playing the part of someone important. No one played the part better than Alistair Finch. Seated at his usual corner table, a minimalist slab of reclaimed oak that offered both privacy and a commanding view, he was the living embodiment of modern royalty. His suit was a custom Tom Ford, a whisper of charcoal gray so dark it was nearly black, tailored so perfectly it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, its understated elegance, a quiet testament to a fortune so vast it had become an abstraction. Alistair was the CEO and founder of Finch Capital, a private equity behemoth, whose logo, a stylized golden falcon, was emblazoned on skyscrapers from New York to London to Hong Kong. His public persona, meticulously crafted by a team of public relations wizards, was that of a tough but fair visionary, a philanthropic genius who built libraries with one hand while closing nine-figure deals with the other. The reality known only to those trapped in his orbit was far colder. Alistair Finch did not suffer fools, and his definition of a fool was anyone who did not anticipate his needs, agree with his opinions, or move out of his way with sufficient speed. He saw the world not as a community of people, but as a collection of assets and liabilities. Today, a very large asset was turning into a liability. A multi-billion-dollar merger with a German tech conglomerate, a deal that was to be his magnum opus, was hitting a snag. His phone, lying flat on the table, buzzed with an incessant stream of messages from his legal team in Frankfurt. Each buzz was a fresh spike of irritation. Another. The word was not a request. It was a command dropped into the air like a stone. Maya Reynolds, who had been discreetly wiping down a nearby table, turned. She was 24, and the quiet exhaustion in her eyes was a stark contrast to the performative energy of the cafe's patrons. She was in her final year of a journalism degree at NYU, and the tips from the Gilded Bean were the precarious bridge between her student loans and a tiny apartment in Queens she shared with two other students. She wore the cafe's uniform, a crisp black apron, over a white shirt, with a neatness that belied the 8-hour shift she was already 6 hours into. "Of course, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice soft but clear. Another large black Americano. Alistair didn't look up from his phone. He just grunted a sound of dismissal. Maya moved back to the gleaming chrome of the La Marzocco espresso machine, the heart of the café. She went through the familiar comforting motions, the grind of the beans, the satisfying tamp, the gush of near-boiling water. She was good at her job. She was efficient, unobtrusive, and remembered the regulars' orders. She remembered that Mr. Finch liked his coffee volcanically hot and delivered within 90 seconds of his last sip. As she placed the steaming ceramic cup on a small saucer, her own phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A text from her mother. "Radiology appointment moved to 3 p.m. Can you come?" Maya's stomach tightened. Her mother's fight with cancer was a constant low-grade hum of anxiety in her life. She couldn't leave her shift early, not again. She typed a quick apologetic reply, her fingers fumbling slightly. She picked up the cup and approached Alistair's table. He was now on a call, his voice a low, menacing growl. "I don't care what their board says. You make it happen, or you'll be updating your resume from a park bench. Do you understand me?" Maya waited a polite foot away, holding the saucer. He was engrossed, jabbing a finger at his phone's screen. The seconds ticked by. One of the cafe's unwritten rules was to never interrupt a patron on a call, especially not this patron. But another rule was that Mr. Finch's coffee was to be served hot. She saw the last dregs in his old cup. She had to place the new one down. Taking a small, cautious step forward, she reached to place the fresh cup beside his phone. It was a movement she had made 100 times, but at that exact moment, Alistair Finch, infuriated by a message that had just flashed across his screen, slammed his fist on the table. It wasn't a world-shaking blow, but it was enough. The table jolted. The back of his hand caught the saucer she was holding. The world seemed to slow down. The heavy ceramic cup filled with scalding black coffee tilted, lifted, and flew. For a horrifying silent second, it seemed to hang in the air before its contents erupted in a dark, hot wave directly onto Alistair Finch's pristine white shirt cuff and the sleeve of his $1,000 suit. The heat was instantaneous. The shock was absolute. A dark, ugly stain bloomed across the expensive fabric. Alistair Finch looked from his sleeve to Maya. His face, usually a mask of controlled, predatory calm, twisted into a mask of pure, undiluted rage. The multi-billion-dollar deal, the insolence of the German board, the pressure of his empire, all of it found a single convenient target. "You clumsy, incompetent idiot!" He hissed his voice, slicing through the cafe's quiet hum. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Maya froze her hand, still outstretched. I'm so sorry, sir. You hit the table. Are you blaming me?" He snarled, rising from his chair. He was taller than she expected, a looming, menacing presence. "You think you can ruin a $10,000 suit and then blame me?" "No, I just meant—" She stammered, her face flushing with a mixture of fear and humiliation. Alistair picked up his now empty old coffee cup. His knuckles were white. The fury in his eyes was terrifying. He saw her not as a person, but as the final infuriating malfunction in a day of malfunctions. She was the embodiment of the incompetence that was threatening his legacy. "Let me show you what incompetence feels like," he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. And with a flick of his wrist, he threw the remaining dregs of cold coffee from the old cup directly at her. It wasn't hot, but it didn't matter. The dark liquid splashed across her face and down the front of her white shirt, a cold, shocking insult. A few drops clung to her eyelashes. The gasp from the surrounding tables was a collective intake of breath. For a moment, Maya just stood there, stunned, the smell of stale coffee filling her nostrils as it dripped from her chin onto her apron. Alistair Finch gave her a look of utter disgust, as if she were an insect he had just swatted. He threw a $100 bill onto the table. "For the damages," he sneered, though it was unclear whose damages he meant. He grabbed his phone and coat and strode out of the cafe without a backward glance, the automatic door whispering shut behind him. Maya stood motionless in the sudden, deafening silence. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, 100 smartphones quietly being aimed in her direction. She felt the cold drips running down her neck, the shame burning hotter than any coffee ever could. She didn't cry. Not yet. All she could think about was the little red light on the dome-shaped security camera mounted on the ceiling high in the corner. It was a tiny, unobtrusive dot of black plastic, and it had seen everything. The silence that followed Alistair Finch's exit was heavier than any sound. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of shared shock and second-hand humiliation. For a few seconds, the patrons of the Gilded Bean were frozen, a tableau of open mouths and wide eyes. Then the spell broke. The murmur returned, but it was different now, hushed, excited, conspiratorial. Phones that had been discreetly aimed were now being actively used, thumbs flying across screens as the first whispers of the incident hit social media. Maya remained rooted to the spot, the cold coffee slowly seeping through her shirt, chilling her skin. She could feel the sticky residue on her cheek and in her hair. Each drip that fell from her chin to the floor felt like a hammer blow to her dignity. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a spectacle. Her manager, a perpetually flustered man named Robert, scurried over from behind the counter. He was wringing his hands, his face pale. Robert's primary business philosophy was to avoid conflict at all costs, especially with clients like Alistair Finch, whose monthly spending at the café could cover a part-time employee's salary. "Maya, are you all right? Oh my goodness," he said, his voice a low, panicky whisper. He held out a handful of napkins but didn't dare touch her. "Go to the back. Go on, clean yourself up." His concern felt hollow, laced with an urgency that had nothing to do with her well-being and everything to do with restoring the café's serene, high-end atmosphere. He was already glancing nervously at the other tables, offering apologetic little smiles. As Maya turned, her eyes met those of a woman at a nearby table. The woman, dressed in a sharp business suit, gave her a look of genuine pity before quickly looking away as if eye contact might make her complicit. That brief connection, that flash of sympathy followed by a swift retreat, hurt more than the outright gawking. It was a silent confirmation of her place in this ecosystem. She was invisible until she became an inconvenience, a problem to be cleaned up and forgotten. In the cramped employee washroom in the basement, Maya stared at her reflection. A stranger looked back. Her hair was matted in places, her face streaked with brown, her white shirt ruined by a large, ugly stain that looked like a jagged map of her humiliation. It was here in the dim light and the smell of industrial soap that the tears finally came. They weren't loud, racking sobs, but silent, hot tears of rage and helplessness that traced clean paths through the coffee on her cheeks. She had endured so much to get to this point, juggling a full course load, working 2 jobs, sending money home for her mother's mounting medical bills. She absorbed the daily slights of the service industry, the condescending tones, the impatient snaps of fingers, the paltry tips on large bills with a practiced stoicism. It was all just noise, a temporary hardship on the path to a better life, the life her journalism degree promised. But this was different. This wasn't a slight. It was an assault. It wasn't just rude. It was dehumanizing. Alistair Finch hadn't just thrown coffee at her. He had thrown his power, his contempt, his utter disregard for her existence. He had marked her literally and figuratively as something less than him. After 10 minutes, she managed to compose herself. She washed her face, scrubbing until her skin was raw. She changed into a spare t-shirt she kept in her locker, a faded NYU sweatshirt that felt like armor. When she returned upstairs, Robert intercepted her before she could reach the main floor. "Maya, a word in my office." He said, his tone hushed. His office was a windowless closet filled with boxes of coffee filters and cleaning supplies. He closed the door, plunging them into near darkness, illuminated only by the light from under the door. "Look." He began, avoiding her gaze. "Mr. Finch's assistant just called. They are deeply apologetic about the misunderstanding." Maya stared at him. "A misunderstanding. He threw coffee in my face." "It was a high-stress situation," Robert mumbled, fiddling with a box of sugar packets. "He'd had a bad call. He wasn't himself. They want to make it right. They're prepared to offer you $5,000 as a gesture of goodwill for the dry cleaning and your distress." $5,000. The number hung in the air. It was more money than she made in 2 months. It would cover her mother's next round of treatments. It could pay her rent for half a year. It was a tempting, life-altering sum. And she knew with a sickening certainty that there was a catch. "And what do they want in return?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Robert finally looked at her, his eyes full of a weary resignation. They need you to sign something, a non-disclosure agreement, just a formality. It says you accept their apology and agree that the matter is resolved and you won't discuss it with anyone. The press, social media, anyone. Silence. The hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen next door was the only sound. Maya understood perfectly. This wasn't an apology. This was a transaction. It was hush money. They weren't paying for her distress. They were buying her silence. They were trying to erase the incident, to scrub it from existence, just as she had tried to scrub the coffee from her face. They want me to lie. Maya said the words, tasting like ash. They want me to pretend it didn't happen. They want you to be pragmatic, Robert corrected gently. Maya, think about it. It's his word against yours. He's Alistair Finch. Who do you think people will believe this is a generous offer? You should take it. Put this behind you for your own good. For a moment she considered it. The sheer gravitational pull of the money was immense. It was the easy way out. It was the sensible thing to do. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, her worry about the bills, the brave face she put on after every draining chemotherapy session. $5,000 would be a life raft. But then she remembered Alistair Finch's face, the sneer of disgust, the utter lack of humanity in his eyes. She remembered the collective gasp, the feeling of being less than human, a piece of trash to be disposed of. If she took that money, she would be validating his actions. She would be agreeing that her dignity had a price tag, and that price was $5,000. Every time she paid a bill with that money, she would remember the cold coffee dripping from her chin. The stain on her shirt would become a permanent stain on her conscience. "No!" she said. The word was quiet, but it filled the tiny office with an unshakable finality. Robert's eyes widened. "Maya, don't be foolish." "I'm not signing anything," she said, her voice stronger now. "And I'm not accepting his money." She pushed past him out of the stuffy closet and back into the hallway. She grabbed her backpack from her locker, her hands shaking slightly. She was terrified. She had just turned down a small fortune and made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the city. She had no plan, no resources, and no idea what would happen next. But as she walked out of the cafe's back door and into the crisp afternoon air, she felt something she hadn't felt since the coffee hit her face, a flicker of her own power. It wasn't the power of money or influence. It was the quiet, stubborn power of refusal, the power of saying no. Meanwhile, in a sleek black Cadillac Escalade speeding uptown, Alistair Finch was already putting the incident behind him. His assistant, a perpetually anxious young man named Peterson, was on the phone with Cynthia Vane, Finch Capital's head of communications and crisis management. Cynthia was a formidable woman whose entire career was built on making mountains back into molehills. The offer was made, Peterson reported, glancing nervously at his boss. $5,000. The manager thinks she'll take it. "It's not enough," Cynthia's voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm seeing chatter online. A few tweets, a post on a foodie forum. No video yet, but it's only a matter of time. Double the offer, $10,000. And get a copy of the cafe's security footage. I want it buried. I don't care what it costs. Robert, the manager, has a daughter applying to Columbia. A donation to the university's endowment fund might secure his full cooperation. Handle it." Alistair stared out the tinted window at the city blurring by. He felt a fleeting annoyance at the inconvenience, the sloppiness of it all. The waitress, the coffee, the scene, it was all a distasteful mess that needed to be sanitized. $10,000 was nothing, a rounding error. It was the cost of doing business. He had already moved on his mind back on the German merger. The waitress was a problem, and problems were solved by money. It had always worked before. He had no reason to believe this time would be any different. He completely underestimated the quiet, stubborn power of the woman he had just tried to buy. Ben Carter worked out of a cramped apartment in Brooklyn that smelled of old books and day-old coffee. His office was a corner of his living room, dominated by a desk cluttered with 3 monitors, legal pads filled with frantic scribbles, and a perpetually lukewarm mug. Ben was the founder, editor, and sole employee of The Carter Report, an independent investigative blog that specialized in punching up. He went after corporate malfeasance, political hypocrisy, and the quiet injustices that were often too small or too legally thorny for mainstream media outlets to touch. His readership was modest but fiercely loyal, a mix of whistleblowers, activists, and fellow journalists who appreciated his dogged, meticulous approach. His morning was spent chasing down a lead about zoning violations in a luxury condo development when his encrypted email pinged. The sender was anonymous, the subject line simple, "Alistair Finch at the Gilded Bean." Ben's interest was immediately piqued. Finch was a white whale for journalists like him. His public image was so polished, so impenetrable, that any crack in the facade was newsworthy. The email was short and to the point. Subject: Alistair Finch at the Gilded Bean Body. Saw something ugly today. Finch threw coffee at a waitress, verbally abused her. His team is trying to bury it. Happened around 1 p.m. Check it out. A lot of people saw. Ben leaned back his chair, groaning in protest. It was a juicy tip, but it was also flimsy. Saw something ugly could mean anything. Without evidence, it was just a rumor, and Finch's army of lawyers would tear him to shreds for printing a rumor. Still, his journalistic instincts hummed. This felt different. He started by scouring social media. He searched Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for mentions of Alistair Finch and the Gilded Bean within the last few hours. As Cynthia Vane had noted, there was chatter. He found a handful of tweets: "NYC Foodie Gal wild scene at Gilded Bean just now." Big shot CEO type totally lost it on a server. So uncomfortable. Just finance, bro 82. Holy crap, I think that was Alistair Finch. Dude has a temper. Gilded Bean. There was also a short blurry video posted to an Instagram story. It was shaky filmed from across the room and started just after the main event. It showed Maya standing stock still, covered in coffee, and Finch striding out the door. You could hear a man's voice yelling, "Clumsy, incompetent idiot." But Finch's back was to the camera. It was compelling, but it wasn't a smoking gun. It didn't show who threw what. Finch's lawyers could easily spin it claim the waitress spilled the coffee on herself, and Finch was justifiably angry about his suit. It could be framed as her word against his. Ben needed proof. He needed the catalyst. He needed the footage from inside the café. He called the Gilded Bean. "Hi, my name is Ben Carter. I'm a journalist. I'm calling about an incident that occurred earlier today involving a patron and a member of your staff." He was immediately put on hold. The hold music was a soulless, jazzy loop. After 5 minutes, Robert, the manager, came on the line. His voice was tight and rehearsed. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to. It was a busy day, but there were no incidents to report. Witnesses say Alistair Finch got into an altercation with a waitress." Ben pressed. "Mr. Finch is a valued customer. There was a small spill and accident. It's been handled internally. We have no further comment." "I understand you have security cameras in the cafe. Would you be willing to share the footage from around 1 p.m. to clarify what happened?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Absolutely not. That footage is the private property of the cafe and is for security purposes only. Thank you for your call." The line went dead. Stonewalled. Ben wasn't surprised. It confirmed the tipster's claim a cover-up was in motion. Finch's people had gotten to the manager. The official evidence was locked down. He shifted his focus to the other party, the waitress. He didn't have her name, but he had a description from the tweets. He called the cafe back and asked for the waitress who was working the corner tables around lunchtime. He was told no employee of that description was available. Another dead end. For the next few hours, Ben worked his sources. He called a contact at the NYPD to see if any calls had been made from the cafe's address. Nothing. He reached out to a former employee of Finch Capital he'd spoken to for a previous story. but she was bound by a strict NDA and was too terrified to talk even off the record. The walls were going up faster than he could find a way around them. He felt a gnawing frustration. He knew the story was there, bubbling just beneath the surface. He could feel the heat of it. The arrogance of the rich and powerful, the vulnerability of the working class. It was a timeless, potent narrative. But without a primary source or hard evidence, his hands were tied. His break came from an unexpected place. Late that evening, he received another anonymous email. This one was from a different address. Subject R.E. Alistair Finchbody. They're trying to bury it. I work for the company that manages the cafe's security system. Finch's people paid my boss a lot of money for the master drive. They think they have the only copy. They don't. I make my own backups. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was the source. I can't send it through here. The email continued. Too traceable. But the file has been uploaded to a secure anonymous file sharing service. It will be deleted in 1 hour. Here is the link and the one-time password. A string of encrypted characters followed. Ben's hands trembled slightly as he copied and pasted the link. His browser opened to a stark black screen with a single password field. He entered the password. A download prompt appeared, GB cam4.130725 MP4. The file size was large, high definition. He initiated the download. The progress bar crawled across the screen with agonizing slowness. It felt like an eternity. He kept glancing at the clock, imagining the file being wiped from the server before the download completed. It was a race against time, a digital heist. Finally, with minutes to spare, the download finished. He triple-checked that the file was secure on his encrypted hard drive before clicking on it. The video player opened. The quality was crystal clear, the angle wide and damning. It was from the camera he'd seen in the Instagram clip, the one high in the corner. It captured Alistair Finch's table and the surrounding area in perfect detail. There was no audio, but none was needed. He watched the scene unfold like a silent brutalist play. He saw Maya's careful approach. He saw Finch engrossed in his phone. He saw Finch's fist hit the table, a sudden violent motion. He saw the hot coffee fly, a clear accident caused by Finch's own action. He saw the dark stain blossom on Finch's sleeve. And then he saw the moment that would change everything. He saw Finch's face contort with rage. He saw him pick up the second cup. He saw Maya flinch, her hands coming up in a defensive gesture. And he saw, with irrefutable high-definition clarity, Alistair Finch deliberately, coldly, and contemptuously throw the coffee directly into her face. Ben played it again, and again. He zoomed in, analyzing every pixel. Finch's sneer, Maya's stunned shock, the reactions of the patrons around them, the way Finch threw the $100 bill down like an insult. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for spin. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a small spill. It was a raw, ugly display of power and cruelty. This was the pixelated truth, and Ben Carter was about to show it to the world. He knew the consequences would be enormous, not just for Finch, but for the waitress whose name he still didn't know. He had a responsibility to her as well. He began to type, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He would write the story, frame the video, and give context to the silent footage. He would not just show what happened. He would explain why it mattered. The title of his blog post was simple and direct. Billionaire CEO Alistair Finch throws coffee at Waitress unedited security footage. He embedded the video file directly at the top of the article. He checked his text for accuracy, for libel, for any weakness Finch's lawyers could exploit. He found none. The video was its own unimpeachable witness. At 11:58 p.m., with a deep breath, he hit publish. The post went live. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the analytics on his screen, the real-time view counter, began to tick upwards, first by tens, then by hundreds, then by thousands. The Carter report was about to have its biggest day ever. The fuse had been lit. While the digital fuse lit by Ben Carter began its rapid burn across the internet, Maya Reynolds was trying to piece her life back together. She had called out of her next shift at the Gilded Bean, claiming she was sick. The lie tasted sour, but the thought of returning to that space of facing Robert's pity and her co-workers' questions was unbearable. She spent the day in the sterile, quiet waiting room of the oncology clinic, with her mother pretending to read a book, while her mind replayed the incident in a torturous loop. Her mother, Sarah, a woman whose illness had not managed to dull the sharpness of her perception, knew something was wrong. "You're a million miles away, sweetie," she said, placing a frail hand over Maya's. "Trouble at work." Maya couldn't bring herself to tell her the truth. Her mother had enough to worry about. So she just shook her head and forced a smile. "Just tired. Long shift yesterday." The decision to refuse Finch's money felt righteous in the moment, but now sitting under the flickering fluorescent lights of the clinic, it felt reckless. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach. What had she done? She had defied a man who could likely crush her with a single phone call. He could get her fired. He could get her blacklisted from every service job in the city. He could even, her paranoid mind whispered, find a way to interfere with her student aid. She felt small and terrifyingly alone. That evening, as she was scrolling listlessly through her social media feeds, she saw it. A friend had shared a link from a blog she'd never heard of, The Carter Report. The headline hit her like a physical blow. Billionaire CEO Alistair Finch throws coffee at Waitress unedited security footage. Her heart leapt into her throat. With a trembling finger, she clicked the link. And there it was, the silent high-definition video of her own humiliation. She watched mesmerized and horrified as the camera told the truth she had been silenced from telling. She saw the jolt of the table, the accidental spill, and the deliberate, cruel act of retaliation. The video stripped away all the potential lies and spin. It was the unvarnished, objective truth. Beneath the video was Ben Carter's article. He described the scene, the power imbalance, and the subsequent attempts at a cover-up, citing an anonymous source about the hush money offer. He didn't know her name, referring to her only as the Waitress, but he wrote about her with a profound sense of empathy. He didn't portray her as a victim, but as a person who had been subjected to an inexcusable abuse of power. Then she scrolled down to the comments section and the wider social media reaction. It was a deluge. The video was everywhere. Fire Finch and Gilded Bean and Alistair Finch were trending on Twitter. The story had been picked up by larger news outlets, all linking back to Ben's original post. The anger was palpable, a collective roar of digital outrage. This is what peak entitlement looks like. Unbelievable. I hope this Waitress sues him for every penny he has. My company has a multi-million-dollar account with Finch Capital. Sending an email to my boss right now. We need to pull it. Does anyone know who the Waitress is? We should start a GoFundMe for her. Maya felt a dizzying mix of emotions, validation, terror, and a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a story about someone else. The world now knew her as the Waitress, a symbol of corporate arrogance. Her private moment of shame was now public property. Meanwhile, Ben Carter was experiencing the other side of the viral explosion. His blog, usually receiving a few thousand hits a day, had crashed twice from the sheer volume of traffic. His inbox was flooded with emails from major newspapers, cable news networks, and even international press, all wanting to interview him, all wanting to know more. But more importantly, his inbox was filling with another kind of message. The whispers were finally breaking through the walls of Finch Capital. The first email came from a former executive assistant at the company. I worked for Alistair for 2 years. What you saw in that video was a Tuesday for him. The screaming, the belittling, it was constant. I have panic attacks just thinking about that office. He called me idiot, so often I almost started putting it on my nameplate. Thank you for showing people who he really is. Another came from a junior analyst who had been fired for a minor clerical error. He once threw a financial report at my head because he didn't like the font. It was a 300-page binder. It cut my forehead open. The company's HR department made me sign an NDA and gave me a generous severance package to keep quiet about the workplace accident. A third, more cryptic message hinted at something darker than just a bad temper. Finch's temper isn't just for show. Ask about the Phoenix Project from 2018, a tech startup he acquired and gutted. The founder tried to fight him on the terms. Finch ruined him. Not just his business, his life. Ben worked through the night fueled by adrenaline and caffeine. He was no longer just a blogger with a viral video. He was the repository for a decade's worth of suppressed anger and fear. He was a confessor for the corporate sins of Alastair Finch. He meticulously vetted each news story, cross-referencing names and dates, looking for patterns. A clear, toxic pattern emerged. Alastair Finch's public persona was a complete fabrication. The visionary philanthropist was in reality a serial abuser of power. He fostered a culture of fear at his company, where loyalty was measured by an employee's tolerance for humiliation. The coffee incident wasn't an aberration. It was his entire worldview, distilled into a single public act. He treated his employees the same way he treated Maya, as disposable objects subservient to his whims. In the penthouse of his Fifth Avenue apartment, Alastair Finch was finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. The crisis was no longer containable. Cynthia Vane was on a conference call with him and the board's chairman, Marcus Thorne. "The video is everywhere, Alastair." Cynthia said, her voice strained, the usual icy calm gone. "Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, they're all running it. The Carter Report is a top search on Google. It's a doctored video, a hit piece." Alastair roared, pacing his marble floor. "We'll sue this Carter insect for everything he has." "We can't," Marcus Thorne's gravelly voice cut in. "Our legal team has analyzed it. It's authentic. To claim it's fake would be perjury, and would make us a laughingstock when they prove it's real. The damage is catastrophic." "Damage," Alastair scoffed. "It's a spat in a coffee shop the market will forget by tomorrow." "The market is reacting now," Marcus said grimly. "Finch Capital's stock is down 17% in after-hours trading. Our partners in the German merger have called an emergency meeting. They're talking about invoking the Material Adverse Change Clause. They're scared of the brand toxicity. Alastair, you've become toxic." The word hung in the air. Toxic. Alastair stopped pacing. He, the master brand builder, had become a liability to his own creation. "So, what's the plan, Cynthia?" he demanded. "This is why I pay you an obscene amount of money. Fix it." "There is no fixing this with a press release," Cynthia said, her voice flat. "The court of public opinion has already reached a verdict. Right now, our only move is damage control for the company. We need a gesture, a significant one. We need to show that we take this seriously." Alastair knew what she was implying. He could hear the whispers from his own company, the ones Ben Carter was now collecting, echoing in Cynthia's careful corporate phrasing. He could feel the walls he had built around himself, walls of money and power, and NDAs beginning to crumble. The stain was no longer just on his suit or on Maya's shirt. It was spreading across his entire empire. The morning after Ben Carter published his post, the digital spark ignited a global inferno. By 9:30 a.m., when the opening bell rang on the New York Stock Exchange, the video of Alastair Finch was not just a viral clip. It was a cultural moment. Morning news shows played the silent footage on a loop with commentators and body language experts dissecting every frame of Finch's cold fury and Maya's shocked stillness. The hashtag #FireFinch was the #1 trend worldwide. Maya watched it all unfold from the safety of her apartment, the television muted. The video had been given a life of its own. It was spliced into memes. Late-night talk show hosts were already working it into their monologues. An activist group had organized a protest outside Finch Capital's headquarters, with people holding signs that read, "Humanity Profit" and "Coffee Not Contempt." They were chanting her story, the story of the anonymous waitress. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Reporters had somehow found her number. She was getting calls from producers at Good Morning America, from journalists at the New York Times, from British tabloids. They all wanted the same thing, her story, in her words. They offered her money, a platform, a chance to have her say. but the thought of facing a camera, of becoming the public face of this drama, was paralyzing. She ignored the calls, letting them go to voicemail, each unheard message adding to the weight of her anxiety. She hadn't wanted this. She had just wanted him to be held accountable, and the scale of the reaction was both terrifying and profoundly validating. For Ben Carter, the deluge was a professional triumph. His blog was now front-page news. He had done what every independent journalist dreams of. He had single-handedly broken a story that was shaking the foundations of the corporate world. But he was also keenly aware of his responsibility. He spent the morning publishing follow-up pieces, using the anonymized testimony of the former Finch Capital employees to paint a broader picture of a toxic corporate culture. He framed the coffee incident not as an isolated event, but as the inevitable public eruption of a long-festering private sickness. He was careful not to reveal any information that could identify Maya, protecting her privacy as the storm raged. Inside the glass and steel fortress of Finch Capital, the atmosphere was funereal. Employees walked the halls in silence, avoiding eye contact, speaking in hushed whispers. The large screens in the lobby, which usually displayed a live feed of the company's soaring stock price, were now conspicuously turned off. The stock hadn't just dipped, it had plummeted. By noon, it was down a staggering 35%, erasing billions of dollars in market value. The Falcon logo seemed to mock them from the walls, a predator brought low. Alistair Finch had arrived at his office at dawn, determined to project an image of strength and control. But the facade was cracking. He watched the protests on the street below from his panoramic window, his jaw clenched. He saw the news reports. He read the blistering editorials, calling him a symbol of everything wrong with corporate America. But the true death blow came not from the public, but from his own peers. An email arrived from Klaus Richter, the stern, unflappable CEO of the German tech conglomerate. The language was precise, brutal, and final. Alistair, in light of the recent events and the significant reputational damage incurred, our board has voted unanimously to terminate the merger agreement, effective immediately. We cannot in good conscience align our brand with the conduct displayed. We wish Finch Capital the best in navigating its current challenges. Regards, Klaus Richter. Alistair read the email 3 times. The deal, his legacy, the culmination of 2 years of ruthless negotiation, was gone, evaporated, killed by a cup of coffee and an internet blogger. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over him, so intense it made him dizzy. He wanted to smash something, to scream, to fire everyone. But for the first time in his life, there was no one left to intimidate, no problem he could solve by throwing money or power at it. He had become the problem. At 2:00 p.m., he was summoned to the main boardroom for the emergency meeting with the board of directors. As he walked through the executive suite, he noticed how his senior partners, men he had made millionaires, averted their gazes. Their silence was more damning than any accusation. The boardroom was cold and silent. The 10 members of the board were seated around the massive mahogany table, their faces grim. Marcus Thorne, the chairman, sat at the head. "Alistair, thank you for joining us." Marcus began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "I think we can dispense with the pleasantries. We have all seen the video. We have seen the stock price. We have seen the email from Klaus Richter." "This is a witch hunt." "Marcus," Alistair started, his voice a low growl. "A coordinated attack by a nobody journalist. We can weather this." An older board member, a woman named Eleanor Vance, who had known Alistair for 20 years, spoke up. "Can we, Alistair? I've had calls this morning from 3 of our largest pension fund clients. They're threatening to pull their investments. This isn't about a journalist. It's about your conduct. It's about your fitness to lead this company." "My fitness!" Alistair laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I built this company from nothing. I made every single one of you rich. You talk about fitness." "The company you built is now worth 35% less than it was yesterday," Marcus stated flatly. "And the bleeding hasn't stopped. The brand is toxic. The leadership is toxic. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders to stop the bleeding. The board has held a vote." Alistair stared at him, a dawning horror in his eyes. He could see it on their faces, the cold, calculated calculus of self-preservation. He had taught them this, after all. He had taught them that loyalty was a liability and sentiment was for fools. Now they were applying his own lessons to him. "Effective immediately," Marcus Thorne continued, his voice echoing in the silent room. "The board has voted to terminate your employment as CEO of Finch Capital for gross misconduct and actions detrimental to the company's reputation and financial stability. You will be resigning for personal reasons, and we will issue a statement to that effect within the hour." The words hit Alistair with the force of a physical impact. Terminated, fired, from his own company. It was unthinkable, impossible. He looked around the table from face to face, searching for an ally, for a single dissenting voice. He found none. He saw only stony expressions, averted eyes, and the grim finality of a decision already made. He had been so focused on the external threat, the journalists, the public, the Germans, that he had failed to see the coup forming within his own walls. The whispers he had ignored for years had finally become a roar that even he could not shout down. Alistair Finch, the titan of industry, the master of the universe, said nothing. He simply stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He turned and walked out of the boardroom, out of the company he had created, his footsteps echoing the end of an era. The viral deluge had not just breached the walls of his empire, it had washed him away completely. The press release from Finch Capital landed at 3:15 p.m. It was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism. It announced with deep regret that Alistair Finch would be stepping down from his role as CEO for personal reasons, effective immediately. It thanked him for his visionary leadership and countless contributions to the firm. It named an interim CEO, a bland, safe choice from within the company. But nobody was fooled. The world knew he had been fired. The resignation was not an act of contrition. It was an ejection. The news sent another shockwave through the financial world. Alistair Finch wasn't just a CEO, he was Finch Capital. His departure created a vacuum of power and confidence that no press release could fill. His personal brand, once the company's greatest asset, had become its most toxic liability. Alistair didn't go home. He couldn't face the pitying looks of his staff or the inevitable phone calls from his few remaining friends. Instead, he had his driver take him to a private members-only club downtown, an old-world bastion of leather armchairs and hushed conversations, where he thought he could find refuge. But even here, the modern world intruded. The members' titans of law and finance nodded at him stiffly, their eyes filled with a mixture of morbid curiosity and undisguised relief that it was him and not them in the eye of the storm. He could hear them whispering as he passed. He ordered a scotch at the bar, but the bartender, a man who had served him for a decade, suddenly seemed nervous, fumbling with the glass. The stain of public shame was invisible, but potent. No one wanted to get too close. He turned on the television above the bar. A business news network was covering his downfall. A panel of experts was dissecting his career, his leadership style, his fatal flaw. They used words like hubris, narcissism, and a cautionary tale. They showed the video again and again. He was no longer a person. He was a case study, a symbol of an era of corporate impunity coming to an end. His entire life's work was being reduced to a 30-second clip of his worst moment. The unraveling was swift and brutal. His severance package, though substantial by any normal standard, was slashed by the board, who invoked the gross misconduct clause to void the most generous parts of his contract. Friends who had once begged for his investment advice stopped returning his calls. Invitations to charity galas and exclusive conferences were quietly rescinded. The wings of the hospital and the university library that bore his name were suddenly undergoing renaming consultations. His carefully constructed world of power and prestige was being dismantled brick by brick. But the worst was yet to come. The viral video had not just ousted a CEO, it had emboldened his victims. The NDAs that had been sealed by fear and money began to crack under the heat of the public spotlight. Ben Carter's blog became a platform, a safe haven for those who had been silenced. The former analyst whose forehead had been cut by the binder filed a civil lawsuit for assault and battery. The story, now with a named plaintiff and medical records, made national news. This opened the floodgates. Within a week, 2 more lawsuits were filed by former female employees, alleging a pattern of verbal abuse and gender-based discrimination that created a hostile work environment. They claimed their careers had been deliberately sabotaged by Finch after they rebuffed his advances or challenged his authority. Then came the Phoenix Project. The founder of the tech startup that Finch had acquired and destroyed, a man named Marcus Jennings, who had been bankrupted and broken by the ordeal, came forward with documentation. He provided Ben Carter with emails and memos that suggested Finch had engaged in deliberate misrepresentation and financial manipulation to devalue Jennings's company, before the acquisition a potential case for corporate fraud. The whispers had become an avalanche of legal and public relations disasters. Finch Capital, under its new leadership, was forced to publicly distance itself from its own founder, issuing statements about launching a full internal investigation and a commitment to a new culture of respect and transparency. They were trying to save the ship by throwing its captain and his legacy overboard. Alistair found himself a prisoner in his own penthouse. He stopped answering his phone, communicating only through a team of newly hired, ferociously expensive defense lawyers. He spent his days watching his life being dissected on the news, the empire he had built, now a smoldering ruin. The rage he had felt in the coffee shop had curdled into a bitter, impotent despair. He had always believed that money could solve any problem, that power made you immune to consequences. He had operated under the assumption that the rules didn't apply to him. He had never considered that the world was watching, that technology had given everyone a camera, and that public opinion could be a more ruthless executioner than any board of directors. One evening, staring out at the city lights in buildings he owned, a skyline he had helped shape, he felt a profound and terrifying emptiness. He had everything, and now he had nothing. His name was no longer a symbol of success, but of disgrace. He had lost his company, his reputation, and his future. The great Alistair Finch had been permanently and irrevocably cancelled. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the man stripped of his power alone, with the consequences of his own cruelty. The world wanted to make Maya Reynolds a celebrity, but she refused the lucrative media frenzy. Seeking purpose over fame, she accepted a significant settlement from the reformed Finch Capital with one non-negotiable term: no non-disclosure agreement. In a single powerful interview, she reframed her ordeal not as a personal attack, but as a universal story of workplace abuse. She then used the settlement money and public donations to launch the Dignity at Work Project, a foundation providing legal aid to harassed low-wage workers. She had transformed her moment of public humiliation into a platform for systemic change, finding a different, more profound kind of wealth. Alistair Finch, conversely, was left with an empty empire of his own making. A social and professional pariah, he was financially and reputationally ruined, buried under lawsuits from other victims his story had emboldened. His true lasting punishment, however, was not financial. It was cemented one day in a grocery store, when he overheard a stranger describe a petty tyrant of a manager as a regular Alistair Finch. His name, once a symbol of power, was now a permanent casual synonym for arrogance and cruelty. His legacy was shame, while Maya had built a new one founded on dignity. The story of Alistair Finch and Maya Reynolds is more than just a viral video. It's a powerful real-world reminder that in our hyper-connected age, accountability can come from anywhere at any time. It shows that true power isn't about wealth or titles. It's about dignity, resilience, and the courage to speak truth to power, even when your voice is shaking. Maya's journey from a moment of humiliation to a lifetime of advocacy proves that one person's refusal to be silenced can ignite a movement and create lasting, meaningful change. Her story gives a voice to the voiceless and serves as a warning to those who believe they are above the consequences of their actions. If this story resonated with you and you believe in the power of shining a light on injustice, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with others so this important message can continue to spread. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more compelling stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines. Thank you for watching.